An old black woman like you doesn't deserve to be the mother of my husband, Selena Hayes screamed, swinging a gleaming knife right in front of my face. Just 1 second later, I saw something that froze my heart. An object slipped from her pocket, an old wooden ladle engraved with the words, "Mother's Rules." But then, within a single moment, I realized it wasn't Selena's ladle. It was the same one belonging to the woman who humiliated me 20 years ago. The nightmare of my life was returning in the shape of my own daughter-in-law. Who is Selena really? Is she repeating the torment her mother drilled into her, or trying to kill me to end the past once and for all? If you were me, would you stand up and face her, or stay silent while a tyrant keeps holding the knife? Follow now so you don't miss the next part. Comment, would you stand up or stay silent? My name is Marvell Grant, and I'm 58 years old. My skin is darker than most women in the neighborhood where I live, the inheritance of generations of African-descended people who survived storms to exist in this vast country. I grew up on streets where discriminatory gazes pierced through a person's flesh like needles, leaving scars that time only covered with dust but never erased. I learned to endure, to swallow the cruel words people threw at me as if they weren't worth caring about. But I never imagined there would come a day when I'd have to endure something inside my own family's kitchen. I moved in with my son Darius, thinking it was time for me to rest. He kept insisting I shouldn't live alone anymore, that his house was big enough, that his wife agreed too. But the moment I stepped into their home, something felt different. Not cold like winter, but something tight, heavy, as if I had walked into a room that had been sealed shut for far too long. Selena, my daughter-in-law, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not outright hatred, not contempt at first glance, but a kind of scrutiny, as if I were disturbing an order she had established before I arrived. Every time I chopped onions, rinsed vegetables, or added salt, her eyes skimmed over each movement, cold and sharp like the surface of a metal spoon. Darius was different. He was quiet to an unnatural degree, eyes glued to his phone as if it were the perfect excuse to avoid interacting. I knew he wasn't the kind of man who ran from things, but in this house, he seemed determined to fade into the background. I tried to comfort myself by thinking maybe the two of them were having a rough patch, that my presence might make things easier. But the longer I stayed, the more his silence unsettled me. I decided to make a pot of our family's traditional soup, the kind my mother used to cook whenever the family needed warmth. I've always believed in the power of aroma and the heat rising from a pot gently simmering on the stove, that it could make a house feel like home. But the moment I added the last spoonful of seasoning, I knew things wouldn't go as I hoped. Selena had been standing behind me without a sound. Before I could turn around, her hand reached out and yanked the ladle from mine. The shock made my heart jolt, and in that moment, I only heard the pot bubbling, then her voice slicing into the air. "Why do you cook like that?" Her scream wasn't just a sound. It was an invisible slap, sharp and fast, hitting my chest before I could process it. And then, before I reacted, the ladle in her hand swung down and struck my wrist. A sharp pain, clean, precise, like a needle stabbing straight into my skin. The kitchen exploded in an instant. The soup that had smelled so comforting now carried the metallic scent of tension. Steam rising from the pot mixed with the coldness in Selena's eyes. I stepped back on instinct, clutching my wrist. My heart no longer beat with its familiar rhythm. It stumbled, racing wildly, as if my body understood something terrible had begun long before my mind could name it. I looked at Selena, searching for a clue to explain her behavior. Anger, jealousy, fear, hatred. But all I saw was a pair of wide eyes trembling in a way I hadn't expected. Her breaths came fast, her lips pressed tight, as if even she was frightened by the scream that had just escaped her. Darius stood frozen, his phone having slipped from his hand without him noticing. He looked as if he wanted to move toward me, but couldn't lift his feet. I didn't know what he was afraid of, Selena, or the truth quietly unfolding before him. I drew a breath, trying to steady myself, but the pain in my wrist pulsed sharply. The red mark was spreading. My whole body felt cold, not because of the strike, but because I could sense the house shifting around me in a way that could never be reversed. I had endured so many things in my life, but never a humiliation like this, in my own kitchen, the place I believed was safest. Who would have thought this was only the first strike? I thought that after the ladle strike, Selena would feel guilty or at least avoid me. But that afternoon, when I stepped into the kitchen to clean up the unfinished pot of soup, I found Selena leaning against the sink, her hands gripping the stone countertop. Her shoulders trembled slightly with each breath, and her eyes were wide, unfocused. That look reminded me of a child afraid of the dark, trying to suppress a panic it couldn't control. I stood still for a few seconds, sensing the cold air slipping through the doorframe as if it were seeping into the space between us, then asked softly if she was all right. Selena spun around, her eyes still trembling yet filled with anger. That anger wasn't directed at me, but at something distant, something old. I stepped a little closer, intending to place my hand on the counter to steady my voice, when Selena let out a short, distorted laugh, her fingers tightening until her knuckles turned white. She stepped toward me, breathing rapidly, her lips shaking as if holding back something about to shatter. I hadn't expected that. Moments earlier, I thought she was frightened, yet in that instant, I saw a storm pushing through the layers of calm inside her. I asked again, more gently, careful not to worsen the situation. Selena, is something wrong? The moment I finished speaking, her voice lashed out like a cut. What would a black woman like you know about cleanliness? Her words felt like a long blade slicing straight into my chest, sharp and cold enough to leave me frozen. I had been insulted for my skin color, out there in the wide world among strangers. But here in my own kitchen, from the mouth of the woman meant to be my daughter-in-law, it carved a wound so real, I forgot to breathe. I saw her eyes flicker, uncertain whether she realized what she had said or if it was another voice echoing through her. Selena lifted a hand to her mouth, not in remorse, but as if trying to block another scream rising from her throat. Her gaze flickered wildly sharp 1 second, as if ready to tear something apart, then suddenly lost, as if she had fallen out of the room entirely. I tried to stay calm, though my heart pounded hard, not just because of her blatant contempt, but because something darker, heavier was pulsing underneath her behavior. Darius appeared in the kitchen doorway, standing still for a moment, as if trying to grasp the tension hanging between us. His eyes on Selena didn't look like a husband's anger or a man defending his wife. They looked like a doctor observing a patient during a sudden complication, or someone familiar with outbursts that others wouldn't understand. When Selena saw Darius, she stiffened, then stepped back, her eyes darting away as if afraid of being exposed. Darius said nothing, simply watching her, noting every tiny shift in her breathing, every tremor in her movement. I looked at my son and realized the worry in his eyes wasn't for me. It was a deeper fear, the kind that comes from understanding something you can't control. For a brief moment, I saw him wanting to step between us, but he stopped himself, his fingers trembling slightly. It made me wonder how long he had been living in this atmosphere, surrounded by these episodes that I had only seen the surface of. Selena turned away, said nothing more, just grabbed her phone and rushed upstairs, her footsteps pounding in short, hurried bursts. I sat down on the chair near the kitchen door, my hand resting on the wrist still aching from the morning's strike. The air around me shifted again, no longer the confusion or unfamiliarity I sensed when I first arrived, but something quieter, more dangerous, waiting for the right moment to rise. That night, after Darius had been at work for hours and I thought I could finally rest, a strange sound drifted down from Selena's room. I froze in the hallway, my heart skipping as I realized it wasn't the voice of one person, it was the voices of two. I stood at the foot of the stairs for a long moment, listening to the sound drifting down from Selena's room. The fragmented sobs chilled my spine, not like the cries of a grown woman. They were more fragile, trembling, like a child who had made a mistake and was begging someone for mercy. Instinct told me I shouldn't go up, but my feet kept climbing, slow and cautious. The silence upstairs was so heavy I could hear my heartbeat pounding at odd intervals, as if warning me that something was coming. When I reached Selena's door, her voice slipped out small, yet filled with desperation. "I did it right. Don't hit me anymore." I held my breath. That sentence pierced me like a needle. Selena, the woman who had swung a sharp knife at me in the kitchen, was now crying like a child, pleading for compassion. I placed a hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn it. Something in her tone told me I was standing in front of something that didn't belong entirely to the present. Her voice cracked in short bursts, each followed by a sharp inhale, as if she were hiding from someone, approaching someone I couldn't see. The cold seeping out from the gap beneath the door made my skin sting, though I couldn't tell whether it was the temperature or the fear I still couldn't name. I stepped back when a figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Darius looked at me, freezing when he realized I had heard what came from the room. He walked toward me, his footsteps light, as if afraid to disturb the tense silence surrounding us. When he reached my side, I whispered a question through a trembling breath. Darius placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice low, as if he didn't want anyone but me to hear. "Mom, I think Selena has been haunted since she was little." I turned to him, eyes widening instinctively. The words I had just heard still echoed in my mind, and his confession felt like the threshold of something we were both about to cross. Darius avoided my eyes, staring at the floor, as though it hurt to say it out loud. I saw the exhaustion in his shoulders, a weight he must have been carrying for far longer than I imagined. The worry in his eyes was now something clearer, like a mask he had tried to hide but could no longer keep on. I opened my mouth to ask more, but before I could say anything, a heavy thud burst from Selena's room, like someone striking the wall. Darius flinched while I froze. The air outside her door grew dense, as if every molecule had tightened, waiting for something to erupt. Darius raised his hand about to knock gently when the door suddenly flew open. Selena stood there, her eyes flaring like two burning needles. "Were you listening to me?" Her voice was as sharp as a blade, hitting me before I could gather myself. Her face was flushed, not with embarrassment, but with fury tearing through her chest. Her hair hung around her face, hiding part of her expression, but it was the whites of her eyes that made my spine lock. They twitched, shifting rapidly like someone pried from a nightmare, but still trapped halfway inside it. Her hands curled, fingers tight, as if ready to dig into anything in reach. Darius stepped forward, trying to soothe with a calm tone, but Selena didn't look at him. She stared at me instead, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. a mixture of hatred, panic, and a pain she herself couldn't contain. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady my voice, but just as I prepared to explain that I was only passing by, Selena stepped closer. The short distance between us let her breath hit my skin, warm and heavy. In her eyes, I still saw traces of tears that hadn't dried, a trembling look, like someone standing on the edge between sanity and collapse. For a brief instant, I thought I saw a child clutching a wooden ladle, standing before a mother with a raised hand. But that image vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold stare that tightened around my chest. Selena's voice dropped low, no longer screaming like when she attacked me, but cold, concise, and heavy enough to anchor the air. "You shouldn't be in this house anymore." And I stood there, facing a sentence that felt less like a threat and more like a verdict. I thought that after our confrontation in the hallway, Selena would avoid me for at least a few days. But the next morning, when I went downstairs to prepare a simple meal for Darius, I heard pots clattering as if someone were throwing everything around. My heart lurched, and when I stepped inside, the scene before me made my breath catch. Selena stood beside the sink, gripping the pot of soup I had cooked yesterday. The moment she saw me, her face shifted in a way I couldn't interpret. Her pupils twitched, her mouth contorted, as though she were trying to hold something back that was rising from deep inside her chest. I hadn't even asked anything when Selena lifted the pot. The hot liquid inside swayed with each tense breath she took. I stepped forward, intending to stop her with words, but she screamed first, her voice dripping venom. "This is as filthy as you." Then she dumped the pot, letting the soup spill violently into the sink, splashing across the counter and onto my hand. The sound of the boiling broth crashing into the metal sink rattled the room. I stood frozen, cold, spreading from my knees to my chest. The act itself hurt less than the hostility packed into her words. Steam rose from the spilled soup and hit my face. In the haze of heat, Selena's face blurred and sharpened through the shifting mist. And then, in a moment where I wasn't sure I was still breathing, another face emerged behind it. A blonde woman, her eyes sharp and deep enough to make my heart clench. The image layered itself over Selena's face, merging and separating like something projected straight from a memory I had tried to bury. My chest tightened when I recognized it, familiar to the point of terror. A cold ripple ran down my spine, making my legs weaken. Selena staggered back, clutching her head as if tormented by an invisible enemy. A smile twisted across her lips, yet tears streamed down at the same time with each broken breath. I had seen people lose control back when I worked at the community center, but the distortion in Selena's eyes was something else, like two people fighting for control inside the same body. Darius burst into the kitchen when the crash became too loud. He looked at Selena, then at me, his expression that of someone witnessing a fear long buried. As Selena started hitting the cabinets with her hands, Darius rushed to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, trying to stop the trembling in her limbs. Selena resisted, crying without rhythm, then switching to ragged bursts of laughter that scraped the air like something tearing. I stepped back to give space to the storm unfolding before me. Darius glanced over Selena's shoulder at me, and in his eyes was a despair that any mother would recognize immediately. The strain in every move he made showed he feared she might shatter if he let go for even a moment. Selena eventually stopped resisting, her breath jagged like someone running through cold wind. She pressed her face into Darius's shoulder, her sobs fading but not disappearing. I looked at the streaks of soup left on the sink and felt this scene went beyond a simple outburst. I replayed the moment I saw the blonde woman's face behind Selena's, The old memory slammed back into my mind, forcing me to look at Selena longer, searching for an answer to whether I had truly been mistaken. Darius patted her back gently, then looked at me again, his eyes reddened from exhaustion. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped as if rearranging the words he had kept locked inside for too long. Selena still trembled in his arms, and I stood only a few steps away, feeling as if I had opened a door I never should have touched. The kitchen was soaked in steam, the metallic smell of spilled broth, and the heavy breaths of 3 people unsure of what awaited them next. At last, Darius looked directly at me, his voice coarse with strain. "Mom, you've met Selena's mother before, haven't you?" The question fell into the kitchen like metal striking stone, freezing me in place as my heart tightened sharply in my chest. I stood still in the kitchen, still thick with steam and the sound of Selena's ragged breathing. Darius's question stirred the memories I had buried long ago, as if wind had swept away the sand covering them. I looked at my son, searching for a reason to refuse, but the seriousness in his eyes told me this was no longer the time to hide. Darius held Selena in his arms as she tried to steady herself. For several moments, the kitchen was quiet, yet it felt as though a door to the past was slowly opening, pulling back pieces of memory I never wanted to face again. Darius helped Selena sit down, then took a seat across from me. His eyes carried a weight I recognized immediately, the weight of someone who had endured something for far too long and finally found a moment to speak. I pulled a chair toward myself and sat. My hand still burned from where the hot soup splashed, but that pain was nothing compared to the dread of confronting what I had long sensed. Darius looked down at his hand, turning his wedding ring between his fingers as if doing so might steady him. When he finally looked up, his voice was rough, stripped of hesitation. Selena's mother used to beat her with a ladle to train her mom. I didn't move. It felt like someone had blown out all the air inside my chest. Darius continued each sentence, peeling back a layer of skin from a wound not yet healed. He said Selena's mother forced perfection on her, from washing dishes to setting the table to seasoning a pot of soup. Any mistake brought the wooden ladle down. Selena grew up through those repeated strikes, carrying with her the belief that she would never be good enough. I glanced at Selena, curled into Darius's shoulder, her body folded like a child still trapped in her own past. Darius lowered his voice further, almost as if afraid Selena might hear. She hears her mother's voice whenever someone does something wrong, even if the person in front of her is you. The words froze the back of my neck. I had sensed something strange in Selena's reactions, but now it became painfully clear. Her fury wasn't born from the present, but from the shouted commands of a woman long dead, a voice still gripping her life. I shuddered, remembering Selena's eyes when she screamed those hateful words in the kitchen. That voice hadn't entirely been hers. I leaned back, feeling my thoughts swirl. The face of the blonde woman appearing in the steam when the soup spilled hadn't been a hallucination. It was memory, the face I had seen 20 years ago, back when I worked in a small diner in the suburbs. She walked in with that contemptuous stare and a voice crafted to crush people like me. "What would a black one like you know about cooking?" That sentence burned into my skin like acid. I never thought I'd see her again, let alone have her shadow reshape the life of my son. I looked at Selena, trembling in Darius's arms, her sobs softening but not fading. In that moment, I understood that she was not entirely the person who harmed me. Inside her was a voice, the thud of a wooden ladle, the imprint of years of fear carved into her mind. But then I remembered how she had looked at me, the way she screamed, the cruelty in her tone. There was more than fear in her. There was the inheritance of a hatred passed from one generation to the next. As if sensing my thoughts, Darius stood left the room briefly, then returned with a phone. His eyes were red when he held it toward me. "Look at this, Mom." His hand trembled slightly as he extended the screen toward me. My heart clenched the instant I saw the photograph. The woman stood in an old kitchen, her gaze sharp as I remembered her, blonde hair falling around her face, her lips curved in a smirk soaked in disdain. My breath caught halfway up my throat. It was her. I sat frozen before the photo of the blonde woman smiling with the same lips that once carved deeply into my dignity. My breathing grew heavy, and I knew it was time to voice what I had buried for 20 years. Darius sat across from me, his eyes filled with both anticipation and fear of what he was about to hear. Selena still had her face pressed into his shoulder, yet I could feel the slight movements in her body, as if she were listening to every beat, every breath. The kitchen slowly cooled the steam, dissolving, making space for the truth that was pushing at my throat. I gripped the edge of the wooden table to steady myself. "Darius, I have to tell you this." My voice was low, heavy, and hoarse, as though it had been buried under memories for far too long. I looked straight at my son, then spoke the words that reopened every old wound. "Your mother-in-law, she once humiliated me because of my skin color." The air thickened immediately. I told him about the day she walked into the diner where I worked, her eyes scanning me, and the cold sentence that sliced into my pride. "A Black woman like you would know anything about cooking." I had never forgotten that stare, and I never imagined it would return in another form. Darius stayed silent, and for a moment I saw his eyes tremble like someone struck by a sudden blow. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers intertwined, lips parting without sound. When he finally spoke, his voice was fragmented but clear. "She ruined 2 generations." The words echoed in my mind like metal striking stone. Perhaps he was thinking of Selena more than me. My son had lived in this house, witnessing his wife's outbreaks, the moments she cried like an abandoned child, the times he feared he couldn't save the woman he loved. I saw not only anger in his eyes, but also years of accumulated exhaustion. I opened my mouth to comfort him when the kitchen door shivered. The sound was so faint, anyone else might have ignored it, but my heart tightened instantly. I lifted my gaze, and Darius's eyes also shifted toward the sound, worry swelling like rising water. The door opened just enough to reveal a narrow slice. Selena stood there, hair falling around her face, eyes wide and wet. I didn't know how much she heard, but the look on her face said she had heard enough. Her face trembled, her lips drained of color, and when she spoke, her voice was not that of someone who had just cried, but a voice packed with hatred and despair twisted together. "Don't talk about my mother like she was a monster." Darius jumped to his feet while I stood stiff. Selena stepped into the room, her gaze locked on me, as if every word I had spoken had struck her straight in the heart. In those eyes, I saw not only the anger of a daughter defending her mother, but also the terror of someone who feared losing the only image of a mother she had left, even if that mother had tormented her through her entire childhood. She stood in the kitchen, her body bent with her uneven breaths. Part of Selena was pain, the rest was the shadow of the woman I had once met. Darius reached out, trying to approach her, but she stepped back, watching him like a cornered animal. I took a step forward, wanting to explain that I had no intention of insulting her mother, that what I said was a truth I had carried alone for many years. But before I could speak, Selena's hand clenched into a fist. "You don't understand her. She wanted me to be better. She wanted me perfect. Her voice broke, then tightened. She wasn't a monster. Each word dropped like a stone onto my chest. She was fighting between the memory of the child she once was and the truth I had just uncovered. Darius tried to step between us, but Selena had already turned away her gaze, darkening as if pulled into chaos. I called out her name, but my voice hadn't even reached her when she spun, bolting out of the kitchen. Her footsteps hammered against the tiled floor, quick and tangled with her ragged breathing. A chill ran sharply down my spine when I realized where she was heading, and before Darius could react or call after her, I heard the kitchen drawer yanked open. Selena was grabbing a knife. Selena lunged forward so fast that my whole body stiffened on instinct. Her hand trembled, yet the knife stayed tightly gripped as if releasing it would make her collapse entirely. The gleam of steel flickered through the kitchen, thickening the air with the smell of panic. Darius shouted her name from behind, but Selena didn't hear her. Her eyes locked onto me, as though dragged back into memories that didn't belong to the present. She raised the knife to my face, her breath hot and frantic, carrying the stench of rage that pressed against my skin. An old black woman like you doesn't deserve to be the mother of my husband. The scream tore the kitchen apart. It was coarse, heavy, and vicious enough that I could feel the sound striking bone. I had heard many insults in my life, but coming from this woman standing in the kitchen of my son's home, it carved deeper than anything before. Selena stood only a few steps from me, her hand shaking violently, yet her eyes were still unblinking, as if she were waiting to see whether I would crumble under her words. I drew in a long breath, then I straightened my back. My spine anchored itself the way a tree stands through decades of storms, not one step backward. Selena inhaled sharply, as if bracing herself to witness fear, but I lifted my chin and looked directly into her unraveling eyes. In that moment, two worlds, hers and mine, collided through wounds we both carried from our pasts. I spoke my voice low, deliberate, each word sharp as a blade. You are not your mother. Do not turn me into a target so you can pour out the pain someone else created. Selena froze, as if I had ripped away the curtain she used to cover every injury she carried. Her eyes blinked rapidly, her breath stumbled, and the hand gripping the knife shook harder. I saw her mask crack, revealing the child who had been beaten, insulted, trained to believe mistakes must be paid for in suffering. Selena stepped back and screamed, her voice fracturing. I tried not to hit anyone, but every time you open your mouth, I hear my mother. She clutched her head, eyes wide as if seeing someone standing behind me. Her gaze held both madness and pleading, like she was begging for help without knowing whom she was begging from. Her lips trembled, caught between sobbing and screaming, the words scraping up from a throat squeezed by years of trauma. I don't want to be her. I don't want to become her. Her voice splintered as though her throat was tearing from the weight of memory. I saw the knife wavering between her fingers, tightening and loosening, as if two forces inside her were fighting for dominance, the urge to destroy and the desperate need to be saved. Darius reached toward her, moving as though approaching a wounded animal. Selena put the knife down, he whispered, his voice thick with pleading. Selena turned toward him, but her eyes were fixed on a void behind him. She screamed again, the knife jerking as if pulled by someone inside her. She made me be perfect. She made me be clean. I wasn't allowed to do anything wrong, not even breathe wrong. Each sentence cut through the room like its own blade. I saw clearly that Selena wasn't fully seeing Darius or me. She was seeing her mother, the wooden ladle, the cold eyes of the blonde woman who had taught her to take her pain out on those weaker than her. I stepped forward slowly, keeping my gaze locked on her flickering eyes. Selena, I called her name, trying to hold on to the last piece of clarity left inside her unraveling mind. You are hurting the wrong person. I am not the one who made you suffer. I am not the one who made you suffer. Selena jerked violently as if struck by electricity. She screamed again, her voice breaking at the end, then lifted her head toward me, her eyes brimming with terror, tears, and a flood of pain that spilled past the edges. In that moment, I saw two figures overlapping, a woman holding a knife at me and a child drowning in the violent lessons she had been forced to learn. Two victims stood before me, one in the present, one from the past. Selena gasped, then choked on a sob. She lifted the knife higher, the blade catching the last sliver of light in the kitchen. Selena raised the knife high. Selena lifted the knife, her wrist trembling with each frantic breath. I saw the steel glint reflected in her eyes, and in that instant, the entire kitchen seemed to collapse into a single point between life and death. Darius stood behind her, ready to throw himself forward, but the knife was raised too high, too close to me, and any wrong movement could turn into catastrophe. I saw the tendons on her hand tighten, her eyes wide with terror, as if she herself feared what she was about to do, but was unable to stop. I didn't know where the calm came from, but I forced myself to stand firm, like a pillar in a storm, keeping my voice steady to reach the last remaining clarity inside Selena's collapsing mind. I spoke slowly, pushing each word toward her like a final lifeline. You don't need to hurt anyone to prove you're different from your mother. The moment the words left my mouth, her eyelids twitched violently. In that instant, the knife froze in midair as if suspended by an invisible thread. Selena staggered, her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes began to glaze over as if something were dragging her into a truth she had been avoiding her entire life. Then her whole body convulsed so sharply I could hear her teeth clatter. Selena opened her mouth, but the sound that escaped was a scraped, broken noise, like the voice of a child trapped inside an adult's body. Her head jerked back, then suddenly she tightened her grip on the knife again, as if the cruelest part of her was awakening. At that exact moment, Darius lunged forward so fast and forceful that the entire kitchen echoed with the impact. He seized her wrist, twisting hard to wrench the knife away before the blade could fall on me. Selena screamed in pain, but Darius didn't release her, his shaking fingers still clenched tightly enough to strip the weapon from her hand. The knife clattered to the tile floor, the metallic clang ringing out like a final period to a moment that could have ended in death. Selena collapsed forward as she lost her balance, her entire body convulsing as though drained of all strength. Darius wrapped his arms around her, trying to keep her from hitting the floor. I stood a few steps away, watching her back arch and release her breath broken and scattered, her hands clawing at empty air as if reaching for something slipping away. In her husband's arms, Selena screamed, her voice shattering like glass. I never wanted to marry anyone. I was forced to be perfect. Each word tore out of her like it was being ripped from her ribs. She grabbed at Darius's shoulders, then pounded weakly at the floor, her movements reduced to desperate spasms. I knew she wasn't talking to us. She was talking to the woman she had spent her entire life trying to please. She told me I had to be clean, had to be right, had to be better than everyone. Selena choked each word, strangled inside her chest. I didn't want to get married, didn't want to become anyone else. I just wanted to breathe, just breathe. Darius held her tighter, muttering pleas that didn't form real sentences. His eyes were bloodshot, his throat locked by invisible hands. Watching them, I felt my heart tighten painfully. I understood then that Selena wasn't only the person who had hurt me. She was the result of a lifetime of abuse, twisted, reshaped, and scarred by a mother who had pressed her into a mold until she no longer knew which pain belonged to her and which belonged to the ghost haunting her. I knelt down, moving closer to my daughter-in-law, who was no longer screaming but gasping for air. Her eyes glistened, her head tilting as if slipping away into oblivion. I placed my hand gently on her arm, as though touching ground still smoldering after a fire. "Selena, can you hear me?" She opened her eyes, looking at me for a few seconds, but no answer came. The kitchen fell silent, the only sounds her strained breathing and the final sobs of someone stretched beyond their limit. Then suddenly, Selena's body collapsed completely in Darius's arms. Her head fell against his chest, her breath extinguishing like a flame snuffed out behind a windshield. Her body grew heavy, slipping from his hands before falling to the cold floor. Selena fainted on the floor. Selena lay unconscious on the floor for almost a minute before Darius could lift her and rush her to the hospital. I walked closely behind, my hand still trembling as the image of the knife hovering just a breath away from me echoed again and again in my mind. That night stretched on like a tunnel with no exit, and it wasn't until the next morning that we finally saw the doctor step out, his face heavy with the kind of weight carried by someone who has just witnessed years of damage carved into a body pushed past its limits. He placed the folder on the table and exhaled slowly before reading each diagnosis aloud. PTSD, obsessive-compulsive personality traits, and repeated trauma responses rooted in childhood abuse. Each word struck my chest like a hammer. It was the summary of a lifetime lived under violence, the product of the blonde woman who had shaped her daughter using blows and cruelty. Darius lowered his head, his hands interlocked so tightly the knuckles turned white. Selena remained unconscious inside the room, the steady beeping of the heart monitor ticking away the year she had endured alone. The doctor continued, his voice dropping further. "She needs long-term therapy. And legally threatening someone with a knife must be reported. However, given her mental state, she will be placed under mandatory treatment instead of detention." I nodded faintly. It was the outcome I had quietly prepared myself for. Justice had to be served, but the truth was too brutal for me to see Selena as a full villain. A part of me knew she had been a victim long before she became someone who caused harm. When Selena woke up that afternoon, I stood at the doorway of her hospital room. Darius had already told her what happened, and when I stepped in, she raised her head, her eyes swollen red, like someone waking from a nightmare they couldn't escape. She clutched the blanket tightly, unable to look at me for long. After a moment, her voice rose, trembling, jagged, as if snapped in half. "I'm sorry. I never knew what love was." That sentence was soft, but it cut through me. It wasn't the apology of someone trying to escape fault. It was the confession of a person who suddenly realized she had never been loved, never learned how to love, and had buried that emptiness inside her reactions. I walked slowly toward the bed, watching the woman curled up like a child bracing for punishment. I understood that this moment would determine the path the family would take from here on. I placed my hand on the edge of the bed, keeping my voice firm enough not to frighten her, yet not soft enough to erase what needed to be remembered. Forgiveness is so you can grow, not so the sin disappears. Selena lifted her head. Her eyes widened as if that sentence had pulled her back to solid ground. I wanted her to understand that I was willing to open the door to healing, but no one could walk through it while denying the harm they caused. What she did must be acknowledged, faced, and remembered. But I didn't want her drowning in guilt. I wanted her to rise from it. Selena covered her face with both hands, tears slipping through her fingers as she tried to breathe steadily enough to continue. I don't know where to start. I forgot what peace feels like. I never understood my mother, and I never understood myself. I listened, saying nothing for a moment, feeling the tremor down my back easing just a little. Perhaps this was the first time Selena voiced the truth she had been hiding under anger. The truth that she had broken from within, and no one ever taught her how to mend herself. The doctor returned to check on her, and I stepped back to give space. Darius placed his hand on her shoulder, and in his eyes I saw a small but very real spark of hope. None of us knew what tomorrow would bring, but at least for today, Selena's heart had begun to open. As I prepared to leave the room, Selena called softly. Her voice rasped, raw from crying and exhaustion. "Wait, please." I turned around. Selena stared down at her hands, as if holding something unbearably heavy. Then she raised her head, eyes cloudy with fear and the weight of something unspoken. "My mother left a message for you." The room went silent instantly. My heartbeat tightened into a single compressed thud. I stood there motionless, sensing that whatever that message was, it would change everything. I stood by the edge of the bed watching Selena try to steady her breathing after her first days of treatment. She looked thinner, but the panic in her eyes had faded, replaced by something softer, more diluted, as if she were learning to place her heart back into its proper rhythm. Outside the hospital room, the rain had just stopped, and a pale light seeped through the window, settling on her like a fragile layer of peace I didn't dare blink at, afraid it would vanish. Selena held on to the bedsheet, rubbing its corner between her fingers, as though searching for the right words. "Could you sit down?" I pulled a chair closer. Silence hovered between us for a few seconds. Selena stared at her intertwined hands, then lifted her eyes, her lips trembling slightly. "My mother said you were the woman she envied most." 1 second. 2. My heart tightened as if someone squeezed it. Those words weren't an apology. They were a slash into a memory I believed had long closed. The blonde woman had humiliated me once, made me feel small. Yet now she had left behind a final message that felt strangely like bitter recognition. I broke into tears, not because I felt triumphant, but because I felt seen by someone I never imagined would acknowledge me. The tears fell onto my hands, hot and heavy. I couldn't stop the question that rose in my chest, raw and honest. A black woman like me, someone she envied. Selena nodded, her eyes reddening again. She said, "You had something she never did, a kindness that made others feel small." She paused, swallowing a sob. She hated that, but she feared it too. I stared at Selena for a long moment. For the first time, I no longer saw the blonde woman's shadow behind her, only a girl trying to climb out of a pit she had been thrown into. The following weeks became a path toward healing, slow, difficult, but unmistakably forward. Selena began intensive therapy, guided through each step by professionals. The nightmares lessened. The distance between her panic episodes grew wider. Darius and I sat with her during family sessions, listening as she untied the knots in her childhood one by one, like pulling thorns out of skin long scarred. I didn't forget what happened, but I saw the effort in her repentance. I saw the sincerity in her attempts to rebuild. And that to me was what true accountability looked like. The day Selena was discharged, I stood near the kitchen doorway, the place where everything had shattered, and watched her approach. She no longer lowered her gaze, yet she no longer carried the hostility that once burned in her eyes. There was caution, yes, but also a quiet determination. "I don't expect you to forget," she said softly. I nodded. "I don't forget. But I choose to help you grow from it." During that period, I saw Darius transformed too. The weight of 10 years seemed to lift from his shoulders. He cared for his wife with patience, with a calmness he hadn't known before. The house no longer echoed with yelling or the tremor of fear. It began to resemble a real home, one with boundaries, respect, and steady warmth. I gained my place back, not as a witness to tragedy, but as a mother loved and respected. Selena apologized many times, not through words, but through actions. She learned cooking from the beginning, standing beside me, asking questions in tiny, careful doses, as if rebuilding her identity piece by piece. I knew our family had truly healed the day Selena stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, then turned to me with a small smile. Not a forced one, a real smile, free of fear. Those who sow poison die in poison. Those who sow love receive peace. I said that as a way of closing the past. Selena smiled back this time, steady, full of gratitude. Our family mended exactly where it had once broken. But life never closes every door at once. One evening, as I prepared to lock up, an envelope lay on the front step. White, unmarked. Only a single line written in a shaky hand. "I fear you, not hate you." I froze. My pulse hammered once hard in my chest. The darkness outside the door felt deeper, and I understood this story still had another path waiting to unfold. I held the letter in my hand for a long time, the thin paper feeling as heavy as the weight of 2 generations. A soft wind swept across the doorway, carrying the chill of the night and a scent mixed with damp earth and something old, something familiar. I looked into the darkness outside the porch, but no one was there. Only an empty space stretching endlessly, like the years Selena and her mother had lived in isolation. I stepped out, letting my feet touch the cool cement floor, then unfolded the letter once more. The shaky handwriting looked rushed, yet there was enough clarity for me to feel one thing. It wasn't a threat. It was a confession from a soul who knew she had done something beyond repair. "I fear you, not hate you." I closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, I saw the blonde woman again, standing in the diner years ago, looking at me with eyes sharp as needles. But this time, I didn't see disdain. I saw fear. The fear of a woman who had lived her entire life in bitterness, and in the end, realized that there are people whose kindness is something she could never reach. And perhaps before she died, she understood that. A late understanding. One that compelled her to leave a message for me, the woman she once tried to belittle 20 years ago. I folded the letter, holding it in my palm like the last piece of ash from someone's life. Behind me, the warm light from inside the house spilled onto the floor where Selena leaned gently against Darius's shoulder, her eyes still swollen but glowing with something new. Life can shatter a person, but the right kind of love can put them back together into someone better. I stepped inside and closed the door quietly, as if sealing off a long chapter drenched in darkness. And I understood this. We survived the storm. Selena was learning to breathe again. My son was finding himself once more. And I could finally hold my head high in the kitchen of my own home. But as I turned off the lights and set the letter on the wooden table, a chill traced its way down my spine. Not fear, a reminder, the story isn't truly over. Then I smiled a calm smile I had lost for a long time. If the darkness wanted to return, I was ready, because this time I wasn't standing alone, and I knew that with everything we had endured, the light would always find its way back.